What's up, guys? Welcome back to Strength 101, the podcast where we break down fitness and nutrition into its simplest form so that you can get the results that you want. Hey, it's me, it's Nick. I'm your host extraordinaire today, and today we're going to talk about exercise variation. Two parts to that. Which exercises should you choose to get the best results for strength and muscle mass? And then how often should you switch up your programming? Two things that I think really screw up people's results are both of these, and we're going to break this into a two-part podcast. So today, what you're listening to is going to be about how do I know which exercises to choose? How do I create a framework for deciding whether an exercise is actually good at driving strength and muscle mass or not? So when it comes to exercise programming, exercise selection, the way that you train in the gym, there is 1,000 different ways to skin the cat. Two people can take very different lifting journeys and get to the same place, having followed different exercises, different programs, different training methodologies. There's a lot of different ways to get there, but there is a point, I believe, when you use too much exercise variation and you start to hinder your results. And so we're going to talk today about what that framework looks like and how to navigate that. So which exercises should you choose to put in your program if you're somebody who's creating your own program, or if you're just looking at programs that are options out there and you're like, how do I know whether this is good or bad for me from a strength and a muscle mass perspective? The very first thing to understand is that in order to improve strength and muscle mass over time, you must practice progressive overload, okay? That's your standard. Over time, you have to challenge yourself to either achieve more repetitions on a given exercise with the same weight or to be able to lift heavier weights over time. So that is on a macro scale exactly what you're looking for. I need to see improvement in my strength, measurable by either moving something very heavy easier, moving something that is heavier, or moving something heavy for more repetitions. However, not all exercises have the same barrier to entry. Some exercises require more skill to perform them than others do. And what's important to understand is what we're trying to achieve by doing an exercise in order to promote growth of strength and growth of muscle mass. And what we're trying to do, the majority of signaling that promotes more strength and more muscle mass from a workout is what we call mechanical tension. This is what we're trying to get our members in the gym to chase at all times. Mechanical tension. That is what is experienced by the muscle fiber that then tells the muscle fiber that it is not big enough, it is not strong enough, and it needs to grow. So, what is mechanical tension? Simply put, mechanical tension is the actual stretch that a load places on the muscle, but it's a little bit more complex than that. But for simple version, you can think when I pick up a heavy weight and I go to lift it, you can feel that stretch and that strain on the muscle. I think the biceps are a really easy way to feel this. If you pick up a heavy dumbbell, especially one that's a little bit heavier than you would normally do, almost like you're trying to max out a bicep curl, and you go to drive that heel of the hand up to the ceiling, you can feel kind of that stretch, the strain, the struggle that is happening in those muscle fibers. And it's just really easy to sense in the bicep, but it happens all over the body depending on the exercise you're using and how much it prioritizes that specific muscle. Now, mechanical tension is sensed by the muscle when you have the combination of two things. And I want to give a quick shout out. I learned a lot of this by reading through Medium articles that Chris Beardsley has put out. I like his collection of reviewing the research, the exercise science research on hypertrophy. And I think that a lot of his concepts are very true here. And so at this point in time, my personal opinions is that this is how mechanical tension works. This is how we coach it, and we are seeing good results from coaching it this way. Mechanical tension is sensed by the muscle fiber and therefore signals the need for the fiber to grow, either in strength or in size, when there is maximum force output, which requires maximum recruitment of the muscle, maximum force output combined with a slowing of the contraction speed, meaning I am putting maximum effort into lifting a weight, and as I'm lifting it, it is moving slower than it did a couple of reps before. So it is that struggle. It is that grind. It's what all of us think of as grinding reps, difficult reps, pushing close to failure. I almost got there. Any of those reps where you're really struggling to push it and you feel like it's slowing down and you're not quite sure if you're going to finish it, you are sending the signal of mechanical tension to the muscle fibers, and you are almost guaranteed that you are telling them that they need to get bigger and or stronger. Another way to think about it is that feeling of I'm maxed out and I'm still not getting the job done. That's what the muscle senses, right? I am maxed out. I am trying my hardest and I'm still either barely getting the job done or I'm not getting the job done. That would be absolute failure, right? And this is what we tell our members to chase. We tell them that every single set is an opportunity to send a message to the muscle that it's not big enough, it's not strong enough, and it needs to grow. And that on every single set, when they have that opportunity, they should push as close to failure as safely possible every single time. And if you look at a workout that way, then you are sending as many signals of mechanical tension as possible to the muscle, and you are maximizing your opportunity for growth, both in strength and in size. Okay, so we're done with the technical aspect there. We know that we need maximal force output, so max effort combined with a grinding rep. The weight is starting to slow down, and that's when we know we've actually sent that signal. Based on this information, the best exercises for muscle growth, especially for beginners, would be exercises that are, one, easy to learn. You don't want to spend a ton of time learning an exercise because you want to spend time actually growing the muscle. And if something is very difficult to learn, it's going to be a long time before you can put enough weight on the bar or on the bench or wherever, or on the machine, in order for you to actually grow muscle. Secondly, you want it to be actually loadable. So you want variation in load so you can get the load correct, so you're pushing close to failure and you're getting those grinding reps that we just described. And the third thing is, we would want the exercise to allow us to push as close as possible to failure safely. So we need to be able to operate under fatigue, and we need to be able to feel like we can actually push to that limit without risk of getting ourselves hurt. So using some inverse logic on this, let's think about what the worst exercises would be for muscle growth. And those would be the opposite. So instead of being easy to learn, they would be difficult to learn, meaning they have a high skill requirement. It takes a long time to learn how to do the exercise properly before you can load it. The second thing would be you can't load it all that heavy. It just has a cap on how heavy you can load it. When I think about this, I think about things that are inherently unstable, or the movement is so complex that it's dangerous to do it with a lot of weight, or it has a high coordination requirement, meaning it's very difficult to coordinate your body to do it. It's complex, and you only have a few reps before you lose that coordination. And the third thing, if it was the worst exercise variation for muscle growth, would be that it's difficult or dangerous to reach muscular failure. And so let's think of something that requires a whole lot of technical execution to be correct for it to be safe. I think of a barbell snatch when I think of this. If you don't get the technique right on that, you're at risk of injuring your back, you're at risk of putting your knees in dangerous positions, risk at shoulder. But if you have your technique correct, it's a very safe and heavily loadable exercise. This is actually why I believe that the Olympic lifts are, frankly, horrendous muscle builders for beginners. And I had this experience. My ex-wife, when we had our first kid, she was training at a CrossFit gym, and they were doing tons of snatches and tons of cleans. And she would come back to the house, and I'd say, okay, what'd you learn today? And she would say, oh, I learned how to do cleans. And I'd give her a PVC pipe, and I'm like, okay, cool. Show me what they taught you. Not only, this is just this specific gym, it's not all CrossFit gyms, not only were they teaching the wrong technique at this gym, she showed me, just for those of you who know the Olympic lift, she picked it up like a deadlift. She goes, you just deadlift it and then you bounce it off your thighs. And she was showing me how they taught her to do it. I'm like, well, that's not right, first off. And second off, she was doing this for months on end, and her bar weight was not improving because it took her so long to learn the actual skill of doing barbell snatches and barbell clean and jerks. So I actually think those are terrible muscle builders for beginners because they check all the boxes that we just talked about. One, they're difficult to learn. Two, because they're difficult to learn, you can't load heavily for quite some time. So you might be learning the skill of the lift, but you're not actually making any changes to the muscles while you're doing that. You're especially not maximizing for muscle growth or strength. And if you perform them under fatigue, that's the third one, they're dangerous. It has a high coordination requirement that makes it very risky if you do it under fatigue. And so, if I was actually trying to do snatches when I'm really, really tired and I'm a little bit wobbly and I'm a little bit dizzy, like that's a real concern for injury. And so I think that most Olympic lifts are actually pretty horrendous muscle builders, and I would never recommend them for people who are just getting into the gym. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Nick, people who do only Olympic lifts are jacked. And it's like, yes, that's true. But the Olympic lifts are more likely like a fun expression of the strength that they've already built doing other supplementary exercise that actually built their muscle and their pure strength. And so I'm thinking Olympic lifters do a ton of heavy squats to full range of motion. They do a ton of deadlift and pull variations, lots of rows, lots of presses. That's the majority of their work. And the Olympic lift is just the practice of the skill and the expression of that strength. And so it's not the thing that's actually driving their muscle mass. And I think this is where people got confused with CrossFit, is they saw a lot of jacked people on TV doing Olympic lifting and thought, wow, Olympic Olympic lifting is the key to me being really jacked. But what they don't see is all the exercises that they did that were very basic exercises that led to their ability to actually perform that. Now, I'm not just picking on Olympic lifting or CrossFit here. The same thing would go for exercise variations that markedly reduce the amount of weight that can be done on them. And so, for example, I think we see less of this now, or maybe like my algorithm is just in a better place on the internet, but seeing people put a barbell on their back and then stand on a Bosu ball, and they're saying that they're going to get higher levels of muscle recruitment because of the instability. Well, yes, that might be true. You might get some stabilizer muscles to fire up. You might work on coordination. You might even improve your balance a little bit. But from a muscle growth and a strength perspective, all you did was effectively limit how much weight you can put on an exercise, and you took an exercise that is a really good muscle mass and strength builder, which is a regular barbell squat. You put yourself on a Bosu ball. Now you're worried about balancing. You don't trust yourself to go to your maximum weights, and now you just made that exercise less effective at growing muscle. And so while it looks cool and it looks fancy, and if you're a personal trainer giving it to a client, it may seem like you know a lot about what you're doing because this is such a strange thing to do. Honestly, you're just giving a worse exercise to people, or you're giving yourself a worse exercise. And so I really recommend sticking to the basics on most things. And another example of this would be, let's say, you see in some of these HIIT classes, and we've done them here too, we just don't do them very often because we found that they're not a very effective exercise. Things like, let's say I do a floor press. I'm laying on the floor, I'd get myself into a glute bridge, and then I press while I'm in a glute bridge. It's like, I think that you can look at that exercise and think I'm getting more bang for my buck because I'm holding myself in a nice stable like back chain position while I'm pressing, but really you probably just reduce the amount you can press because you're worried about keeping your hips tall, and doing an isolated glute bridge really isn't doing much for your glutes anyways. And so I just think that the more complex the exercise, the more inherent instability in that exercise, you're just lowering the amount of weight you can do, and I think it generally makes it a less effective exercise for muscle mass and for strength. So now, what exercise variations would be great for building muscle mass and strength? And it's the ones that you're already thinking of. It's the ones we already know. It's like, don't reinvent the wheel, guys. Squats, deadlifts, presses, rows, pull-ups, things you can load heavily, you can control, you can do them under fatigue with a relative amount of safety. I mean, yes, not everybody is failing on squats because it's somewhat dangerous, but you can get close and you can have some shaky legs and you can feel like you're going to puke in that squat rack and want to fall forward with that bar. People fail deadlifts all the time very safely. Yes, deadlifts can get you injured too, but many people for years on end safely fail deadlift attempts. Bench press is probably one of the best ones. This is why people love to bench press, right? Is like, I can bench press and I can safely push till failure all the damn time. And it's totally fine. Yes, you can still get injured on any exercise that you do, but most exercises that are the basics, your curls, your tricep extensions, your presses, your rows, all those you can do safely and push till failure, and you can load them up really heavy and you're recruiting a lot of muscle mass. And so it's like, well, man, that checks all the boxes of what we consider an effective exercise for strength and muscle mass. So why are we trying to come up with new variations? And I think it's just because we're probably not very patient. We think that there's some type of secret sauce out there that we haven't discovered yet, when in reality, we just need to stick with what works and give it enough time to actually work, because that's what the people who are most jacked out there, that's what they do. And this is why when people argue about whether or not machines are good for muscle growth and for strength, I feel like that argument just fails on its face, because let's go through that checklist of what we talked about. The best exercises for gaining size and strength, they're going to be easy to learn, they're going to be easy to heavily load, and they're going to be very safe to push close to failure. And machines definitely check all those three. I mean, damn, maybe we should be doing more machines. The bodybuilders use tons of machines. Very serious strength athletes don't shy away from doing things like leg press or using machines to create more stability for overhead pressing. Like, we can't get niched into this idea that functional movements, if we use kind of what I think the internet's definition of functional movements is like basically making your body stabilize everything in space. That might not necessarily get you where you want to go from an aesthetic perspective or a size perspective, because this list is very simple: easy to learn, easy to load, and safe to push close to failure. Machines check all those boxes. And I think if you really want to be maximized on size and on strength, then you should definitely lean into using machines. And so let's take an example. And I think this is a good framework that we're not going to go through every exercise that possibly hits these boxes, but here's a good example. How about a thruster? So if you've never heard of a thruster, whether you're doing it with a barbell, kettlebells, or dumbbells, is taking a front rack position with the weight, going down into a deep squat, exploding out of that squat, and sending yourself into a full overhead press. On its face, this exercise is great. You're going to see a ton of super strong, super jacked CrossFitters doing this with a barbell. You're going to see people in kettlebell circles doing it. They use it with dumbbells, or they do the exercise with dumbbells. However, I think the argument would be, okay, so is it easy to learn? Yeah, it's relatively easy to learn. If you know how to squat and you know how to press, you can usually figure out the coordination. Is it easy to load? This is where this one fails for me, because I could load heavier on a squat if I didn't have to go overhead. So is the thruster maximally effective for leg growth? I would argue no. Like, you need to take the overhead press part out of it if you want it to be maximally effective for leg growth. Just do front squats. Am I able to push maximum weight on the overhead portion? I don't know. I mean, the thruster is so dynamic that a lot of times you're getting momentum from your legs to go overhead. So you're not demanding that the shoulder muscles do the work. Or even if you are getting to the point where the shoulder muscles are really having to struggle to get that weight overhead, there's so much instability because it's such a dynamic movement that I would argue you're probably not forcing the muscles to do all the movement like we want them to. And so I would separate the thruster out. If I said a thruster is a good exercise, a better exercise for muscle size and strength is going to be separating that and doing squats first and then doing overhead press. And on top of that, it's very difficult to push a thruster to failure without a real risk of injury. If you have a barbell especially, and you're really trying to drop into a squat as fast as possible, reverse as fast as possible, and get enough momentum to go to overhead and hope you don't fail 3/4 of the way up, when you're really tired, it requires a lot of coordination. You can definitely get yourself hurt doing a thruster. And then the thing that we didn't talk about that I think really hampers a lot of exercises from being great muscle growers and strength growers is that it's lung limited. If you did a series of thrusters, if I had you do 10 thrusters in a row, I'm going to almost guarantee that your lungs reach failure and burnout and shut your brain down and tell you to freaking stop before your shoulders burn out or your legs burn out. It's just not an exercise where you are going to go maximally heavy, take a lot of rest time, and come back to it. Instead, you should basically separate those two movements. So if you're on a program right now, I would recommend you look at each of these exercises that are on your program, whether that's a program you wrote or one that somebody else wrote, and just ask yourself, okay, how many of these exercises, if my goal is muscle mass and strength, check those 3 boxes. Is it easy to learn? Is it easy to load heavy on? And can I relatively safely push it close to failure? And if they don't check those boxes, ask if there's an exercise that's very similar or that trains the same muscle groups that you actually can do that on. And if you can, maybe just test it. Everything's about testing things in the gym, guys. Switch it out. See if it doesn't work for you a little bit better, because it's very easy to just do something that you saw somebody that was jacked doing online and assume it works. But you need to test these things on yourself. And I think this is a very good framework for figuring out what the best exercises are. One more time. Is it easy for you to learn how to do the exercise? Is it easy to load it heavy? And can you push it close to failure relatively safely? And I think if you go by that framework, you're going to find that there's a lot of exercises that are really good for hypertrophy, but there's even more exercises that are terrible for muscle size and muscle strength. And so usually sticking to the basics is best. So definitely vary up your exercises, guys. If you're doing bench presses, do bench press and do decline and do incline, but you don't necessarily need to do a bench press sitting on a BOSU ball, while somebody is pulling on your left arm with a band. Like, save that shit for the internet. If you want to grow real muscle, you want to do your regular bench press in the silence and the darkness of an underground warehouse, right? That's where all the real work is done. And so hopefully this was a good framework for you guys. Part 2 is going to be all about how often you should switch up your workouts, because you can't just do the same exercises forever. You do need to switch up which exercises you do. You need to switch up your programming. So we're going to talk about that in part 2. But remember the things we learned from part 1. Not all exercise variations are the best for creating increases in size and increases in strength. You want to go with things that are easy to learn, easy to load, and easy to push close to failure. And if you can do that, you can get really strong and really big over a lot of time. Guys, if this was helpful to you, please reach out to us on our social media. We're at Strength 101 on everything. We're there on TikTok, we're there on Facebook, we're there on Instagram, and we're there on YouTube. Reach out, though you'll find tons of other videos, little tidbits of us teaching like this. You'll also find on YouTube all of our other podcast videos. Please drop us a comment there if you found something valuable. Guys, this was Strength 101. Peace out.